Hello, everybody. Welcome back, and welcome to this session all about expressions, After Effects, and MOGRTs, and essentially doing stuff more quickly. I'm Simon Walker. I'm Director of Training at Maxon. I'm delighted to welcome fantastic sports broadcast designer and workflow consultant, Jason Hare. Hi, Jason.
Hello.
Hi there. I've worked with Jason for a number of years now, and it's wonderful to have him come and do these things on because he's got so much experience gleaned from all these international tournaments from all over the globe. So I'm really excited about this one. And just a couple of bits of housekeeping before we start up. Yes, we're recording this session. And in fact, you can watch the recording, you'll get a link to it automatically, and you can watch the recording of all the other webinars and these professional workflow webinars that we've been running this year and over the last 8 or 9 months, in fact. And this is the page, this is the one that on my screen here. It's a YouTube channel, it's the Maxon Volume Program Training channel. And shortly after this session, then the recording will appear here. And you can also then watch lots of other sessions in all the tools that Maxon, Red Giant, and Redshift cover. So things like combining the Redshift and the compositing workflows inside After Effects. And Lionel VC did a fantastic session on those recently, as well as beginning modeling and using textures, materials, and deformers in cinema, right up to advanced stuff for animating and using Mograph, as well as lots of other sessions. In fact, some of Jason's previous sessions about using graphics workflows in After Effects and Premiere and Avid. So there's lots of content there. We'll send you the link automatically and I'll put it in the chat window. And also just a quick little mention for the fact that this is the first session of 3 this week. Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, we're running them. So if you're not booked on the other ones, please feel free to download this PDF and just click on the register buttons, and that will take you through to be able to register for Wednesday and Thursday this week. We're extending on all the topics today. I'll let Jason talk about those in a second. And also here's the one for Friday, where he's talking more about data-driven workflows as well. And also, if you've got a team that you work in a team for doing these sorts of things, please let us know, because just at the bottom of the PDF, under all the great info about Jason, is the contact email address, so training@maxon.net. And if you've got a team, these workflow sessions are complimentary. So you can have Jason actually training your team and delving in and giving you custom advice about all the things that he's going to show you now. But I'll share the link, and please feel free to jump in and ask questions, because that's the whole idea about these things. So if there's something that you'd like to know more about as Jason's progressing, let us know and put that in the questions section. I think that's all the things. I haven't forgotten anything so far. So I'm going to transfer over control to you, Jason. So let's make you presenter. Here we go. And you should be able to see Jason's screen coming up.
Cool.
You should have got a little checkbox, Jason, to make you the presenter.
Am I not?
There we go. Great. Yes, I can see your screen now.
Lovely.
And okay, you should be able to hear and see us. Hi, Mads. Hi, Larry. They're just like commenting and saying hi on the questions pod. Great to see you back. Thank you for attending. And just let us know if you can't hear us or you can't see anything. Sometimes we've found that if you've got a local internet spike or drop, that can temporarily affect the audio. But if you've got a steady stream and you can't hear it, usually it's just a setting in the software. So there's an audio setting there just to check that it's going through your speakers. Great. Okay. So what are we covering today, Jason?
Well, as you said earlier, it's the first of 3 sessions. Today we're going to look at making an animated name strap, which the idea is to do something that can be used in Premiere using a motion graphic template. The main principle of this type of project is to set something up so an editor can do things quickly in Premiere without any knowledge of After Effects. The idea would be you might spend a couple of weeks setting the templates up and getting them right, so that an editor has easy access to controlling things. So we can start off by going to Premiere. So here we are in Premiere, and you can see this is an example of what we're looking at today. This has got 3 different layers, which I can use to separately animate on the different elements one by one. So basically we have a background element, a chroma key element, and then the foreground name super. getting lots of beach balls. It's always handy. And the idea when it catches up, obviously one problem is these clips are actually referring to an After Effects project. So depending on how complicated the project is, it can take some time. As we're saying now, here we go, it's caught up. So I've got the three layers, as we said, there's the background, the chroma key, and the name strap. The idea is that the name strap, in the Essential Graphics panel, which those who are not familiar with it, you can find it in Window. This is in Premiere, don't forget. And basically I assign control to whatever elements we want. So in this case, we can change the team, which at the moment is on Anadolu, change the name, change the color of all the elements, and we can control the X position, as you can see there. Interactively change it. We can change the badge. So if we go to Olympiakos, it's basically a red badge. Actually, let's go to Darasafaka. Choose the color picker and pick green. So it flashes black and white for a second, and then it catches up, and now it's all gone green. We can make the name longer or shorter, and you'll see it automatically updates the length. Like that, you can see the box is extended. And then the background in this case is on a separate layer, just so we could separately animate them. And we've only got a color control on that, but you can see we can very quickly change. So the idea would be, say for example, if I'm working on something like this basketball federation, which is the EuroLeague basketball, I can have all of the logos predefined so that an editor can quickly go in and set up a name super to do whatever they want. And you can see it's quite interactive. So as we type something, change it, it updates, the size changes, the position of the lens flare changes. So it's quite useful. So we'll go into After Effects and have a look. A bit of background for this, I first did this in 2017 for the Confederations Cup, and then it was extended for the World Cup, and then I did quite a huge project for the Rugby World Cup last year. These are a couple of images of the package we put together for the Rugby World Cup. So this example is the start of a piece, so this would have the two teams. The backgrounds, we had a huge number of backgrounds because there was group backgrounds for the groups of teams. There was also parts of the tournament, so like the final had a gold background, the bronze match had a bronze background. There's loads of different colors, and then on top of the sections of competition, each country has its own color background pattern. But the idea of this was built up so you could just have a selector to choose which color the background, and then a selector for each team. Other examples, this is a data name strap, which has 2 percentage values and the 2 country badges. And then, of course, the color of the strip could be changed. And then, as you'll see here, that's a different color background. We've lost the percentage. Normally, I'll put a checkbox in to control how many decimal points and things like that, which we'll have a look at tomorrow. Likewise, we can replace the flags with players. On all the major sports events I work on, we always shoot chroma key of every player involved, so it's quite nice. If you're looking at the stats of 2 players, you could be looking at action in the background, but focus on the 2 players that we're talking about, which could be 2 goalkeepers, for example, in football or soccer, and talk about their stats. Other examples of this was a form sheet to sort of see Canada's recent form with its last 5 matches and more specific details on the last match. The idea of all these is you put together a package, and I create a huge number of these templates, and then the producer on the day in the job, so this rugby job, for example, I set this up before the event, and then the producers on location in Tokyo at the IBC would actually build the items based on what stats were interesting for 2 teams. Because obviously, if you had a big rugby nation like England playing against someone who hadn't been in it before, a lot of the form sheet on a team who hasn't played would be irrelevant. So. And then this is just an information page. You can provide statistics on a particular player, so doing a simple Photoshop cutout. This is a pie graph. We're going to look at something like this tomorrow. But part of the point of these is whenever I'm planning a job like this, I'm sort of thinking about it beforehand and what elements I want to use and what control you want to give the editor. And I had previously only done soccer or football tournaments, so the Rugby World Cup threw up an interesting one. As you can see, this has got win, draw, loss with 3 components, which are the 3 important statistics in a football or soccer match. But rugby draws are incredibly rare. So I had to actually find a way to turn that off. So I put a checkbox in. You'll see the text is wrong. That should be win or loss. But I put a checkbox into the toolkit so they could just press a button, and the 3rd slice and third title box just disappear completely. So a lot of it's thinking about the functionality and sort of coming up with a plan and then working backwards to build it. This is an example of a bar graph that we'll be doing on Thursday, something similar to this. And then this is a cool one that showed, because the Rugby World Cup has a limited history, this is just a way of plotting where a country has got through each tournament, which happens every 4 years. And then an extension on this was to do a team versus team. So if you have two big nations, you can see where they've got to each year. Obviously, these aren't real figures. This is just to show how it works to the producers. But it creates, part of when you do these is you come up with an idea, you build them, and once they're in practice, you keep finding errors. One thing I found with this is if two teams were at the same place, you could have two at the pool stage or two who did not qualify. If you end up with an overlap, I set a system up where if they saw that they were on the same point, it would turn into the generic rugby logo. That's obviously quite important, because why would you have England on top or Australia on top? We're supposed to be sort of non-preferential. Especially a lot of the work I do, I work for the host broadcasters, so to us, Australia is just as important as England. So obviously the BBC in England might care more about the England team, but we sort of do everything from a neutral standpoint. So we'll go back to our other graphic. I'll just remind you of what we're looking at. If we go back to here. So basically a background and then a foreground name super. So that's made up as two separate compositions. So we'll start with the background. Now, for the background, the shapes I've generated using Universe Array Gun, which for those who are familiar with the Red Giant Universe toolset, you get a load of different tools. I've used one called Array Gun, which is brilliant for just coming up with backgrounds and patterns, and very cool way of coming up with things. To do it, I just chose a preset. There's a load of built-in presets. If we click on that, we get the presets, and I'll just expand that out so you can see. There's a number of presets already built in. I picked one which I think was something like this one, or maybe even this one, and then just played around with the controls to change the shapes and colors. But this is a nice starting point. Another useful thing is if you do get something like, if you like that pattern, I can save it. I call it Jason's background. And then you'll see when we go to choose a preset, that now sits at the bottom, so that can be a preset for any other projects I work on. So Array Gun's a very useful thing just to come up with a quick background without having to mess around, because obviously you can imagine it'd be quite easy to make all these random shapes growing and changing opacity, but why do that when you've got a plugin that does it really easily? You'll also notice you've got background color control, and within the tool itself, there's colors. You can control the colors of every element of it. I didn't want to mess around with that because, as you saw, we can make it green and red and blue and pick a color from the logo. I've used an adjustment layer. And on the adjustment layer, I'm doing two things. The first is I'm just removing any color. So if we turn that on, you'll see there's the first step is just to make it black and white. Tint Tool's standard After Effects tool keeps the black and then maps the white to, you map whatever colors you want, but I just wanted to lose the colors. And then I'm using a Universe gradient ramp to choose the color. Now, in this case, the gradient ramp, as you know, has a start point and an end point, as you can see here. Both of these are the same. The only reason I've used a gradient ramp is I'm using this exact same background in the graphic we're looking at tomorrow and the graphic we're looking at on Thursday. So rather than build a totally different background for here, I figured why not use the same tool and just set both colors to be the same. One thing I do whenever I'm working on a project like this is, there were two things actually. One is I believe in always labeling everything so it's easy to work out. Because I work as an editor and a designer, I find a lot of the work I do is picked up by other people, and I pick up other people's work. And there's nothing worse than getting an After Effects composition from another designer and trying to work out what they've done, because nothing's sort of logical. So I tend to use colors like green. Dark green generally tells me not to touch it, and yellow has something changeable in it. That's just logic in my head, but if you work with my stuff, you get used to the patterns that I follow, so I always do the same thing. The next thing is I tend to build a control layer. A control layer for me is just an adjustment layer, but I use it to store different controllable attributes. So the only thing you really change with this in the Premiere project is the color. So I've used the effects. If we go to expression controls, which is how it works that way, let's go to color. There we go, color control. I've just dragged one of those in. It just allows you to pick a color and assign it, which I'll pull another one in. So it's normally called color control. I've just renamed it. The nice thing there is that's my master color control. And then if we go to this color tint and look at the expressions by pressing EE, shows you all the expressions, you'll see that the colors I've just pick whipped to this color. So if we do the same here. So it's simply a case of pick whip that and choose that color. And you can see it already does the expression for you, so you don't even have to know how to write an expression. So I've just done that with both. So whatever color I set here, you can see it's interactive. It automatically affects everything that I've assigned. So it's a nice way of organizing. So even though I've got these 3 layers, you can see the color tint, it does the job it needs to do, but no one needs to touch it. The other thing is at the end of the project, when it comes to making the motion graphic template, I've got most of the controls I need in one place, so it's easy and quick to find them. So that's it for the background, relatively simple. The power, I think, is in a ray gun if you want to make funky backgrounds quickly. Obviously, you could also use shots, treat shots. You can do whatever you like. The next composition we'll look at is the name strap itself. Now, the first thing, we've got the control layer, as I showed you before. So that's in pretty much, and you can see I've done the color system as well. I've used light green instead of dark green, but same pattern. The control in this case allows me to control the main color, which is the same process. It's using the color control. We've then got a team drop down, which I'll go through in more detail afterwards. It's using the drop down controller. And then we've got an F position slider, X position slider rather, which just controls the X position of the whole thing, as you can see there. And they're all in this control, so I know where they are to quickly bring them through at the end when we're making the motion graphic part of the project. Excuse me. I'll turn all the layers off so we can look at them one by one. So the first thing we have is a background element. One of the things I was saying before is I tend to try and think of what I'm designing, and in this case, it's supposed to be a sort of futuristic type name super with like data type elements. So I sort of came up with ideas of how I wanted it to look, and then it's just finding ways to build it. So the first element I've got here, which is just, you can see these moving chevrons and a red shape. So that I've used a HUD tool, which is not the universe tool, heads up display, and that's just applied onto a solid layer. And likewise, if we look at the choose a preset, you can go in here and you can see, like all of the universe tools, there's a whole range of built-in presets. And in fact, you can see here, I've cheated and I've just gone with the hex chevrons. If I shrink that back down, you'll see that's almost exactly the same as this. The only difference being I've gone in and tweaked it and deleted the left one, so I only have chevrons coming out on the right-hand side. So that's a bit of a cheat, and it's as simple as that. So I've done a little animation to zoom it out, and all it does is moves along to create some movement. I like all of the elements to have some movement, so they sort of build up and add to the sort of overall design. If we have a look at, press EE again. Now my thing is giving me a beach ball. The only expression I've really used in this HUD layer is the only thing that needs to change is the color. And when it comes back to life, I've just used the same pick whip technique up to my control to give it the color, so that whenever we change, here we go, it's back. So you can see there's 3 different elements. One thing to be aware of is HUD itself has got 4 elements in it. And then within the elements, you can have repeaters. So for example, this chevron is a single element that's using a repeater to make it appear lots of times. The repeater with each repeat appearing on the x-axis, and then it's just got a random thing to make that sort of ripple through. Because each element has got a load of controls and you can play with the color of each element, I didn't really want to have to go digging in because I want everything to be the same color. So the 3 different sections I've got, so you can see I've got element 1, 2, and 3, so 4 isn't used in this case, and I've just pick whipped the color up to the main color in my control, which you can see the expression, which if you know about expressions is basically an address telling it where to get the info from. But if we go to main color, it's just as simple as I showed you before, picking that and picking the color, it writes it all for you. Which is the structure of this expression. This comp is obviously this composition. The layer is called control, which you can see is up here. The effect is called main color, which points it to here. and then it's looking at the value that comes from color, which is this here. So like I showed you before, that's a quick way to change the color. You see now instantly it's blue, so it's interactive. So that's my first step, is the little HUD element. The next element we're using is another universe tool called Progresso, which is this blue bar. Progresso is basically a tool designed for graphs, and you can see the circle graphs, and I'll just expand that out again. There's a load of different graph form functions. Normally it has text on it, and you can build all different elements to graph different functions. I'm actually not interested in the numbers, I'm just using it as a visual element, and this is the one that I started with, a basic one, because it's got these little wedges, which I just thought visually looked nice, which you can see here. So that again was, I've just picked a preset from here, and then I've just gone in and turned things on and off. You've got control to change colors and everything. If we look at the expressions with EE again, you can see the first two, we've only really got two colors we care about. We've got the foreground fill color and the background stroke, the stroke being the box and the foreground fill being these shapes. And they're just simply picked whipped up to the control. Again, the same as everything we're doing. That's quite simple because I only want one color, so it makes it a lot easier in this situation. One thing here is we want the box to be the same shape of the text. So if I bring the text back in, you can see the box will automatically grow based on the text. If I go and add some letters onto the end, you'll notice instantly the box has grown with the text. The way I'm doing that is the width of the Progresso, which is the overall box shape. I've got this simple expression, which is basically using variables. I tend to use letters just because it's faster. A letter is easier than typing a word. The other thing for anyone who's played with expressions is like a language that doesn't tolerate errors. If there's a slight mistake, like a small c instead of a capital C here, it won't work. So you have to learn to do everything perfectly. I tend to keep a Word document, so when I find an expression I like, I'll save it and copy it, and just for lines like that, it's much easier to copy and paste that in and just replace the bits that are relevant. Or likewise, to pick that layer, you can actually select a part of it like that, and then you can go and pick whip a layer if that's what you want to do. This particular situation, A is looking at the layer called name, which is up here, and source rect at time is a measuring device. So if I click on this name layer, you can see here, when I highlight the text, you can see the yellow boundaries of the text layer. Whenever you have text in After Effects, it's aware of how big it is on screen. So what I'm doing is I'm using that yellow bounding box by saying source rect at time, and I'm telling it to specify the width. It's calculating a number based on the width of that text in pixels. My variable B is basically a buffer, which I've just put in by experimentation. 160 is basically this space here and this space here, or mainly this space. It just moves it along a certain amount. In fact, if I change that and make it 180, you'll see that the box goes further to the right. So it's just a buffer number that I've added, because obviously I want the box to be bigger than the text itself, because otherwise it would be lined up to the edges of the text. The next thing I use is a trick to make, because when you're using expressions, animation can get tricky. I do a thing where I use a slider down the bottom, and pretty much anything that animates through this project is the same principle. So I use a slider, which if we just go to the keyframes, so there's our slider. You can see here's our keyframes here, and at this end, basically what it is it goes from 0 to 1, and it's as simple as that. And what we're doing here then is that number from the slider is brought in here at C. So then to make the animation to control the width of this element, I'm using A plus B, which is the width of the text, plus the buffer, and then multiplying that by C. So obviously at the beginning point, that box will be 0 pixels wide, and then at the finish point of the animation, it will be the width of the text, plus the buffer. So it allows me to animate within an expression, and that way the animation will stay true, because otherwise if you were trying to keyframe things, you don't know what the number is because it depends on the width. So by using a slider with a 0 to 1 multiplier, it works quite well. Interestingly, that works better now than it used to. I used to have a lot of problems because of the old divide by and multiply by 0. Used to cause problems, but now After Effects seems to have got over itself. I used to quite often have to put another thing in to add a sort of 0.0001 just to make sure it never actually hit 0. But that's gone away, which is very nice. The only other thing is I've got this little formula here. This is the width of the little segments within the Progresso. And I'm just saying, look at the total width, so look at whatever the value that is, which is 889 at this point, and then divide it by 100, which just makes them, these change size based on the scale of things, just so it has that look that I quite like. So that's basically it for the Progresso to create the box to hold the text. One thing I will mention now, we've talked about the text. I'm measuring the width of the text. I've got 2 text layers. You can see the name animate layer, which I've got turned on. Now the problem here is if you look at, if I select the text in that or hover over it, as we did before, it's not going to do it for me now. The bounding box is much bigger. In fact, you can see it there. So there's the bounding box. Now in this case, it wouldn't really matter because this text is only stretching on the y-axis, and we're only using the width measurement. But by having that changing, it can jitter, especially when, like, say that letter is animated off, it will change the width. So I do a trick where the text layer you see is called name animate, and that has the animation, but all the measurements are coming from this layer called name, which doesn't animate and it's hidden. And that way, whatever you set the length of the text to be, which if I delete those E's away, let's try that again. That's better. You can see the box has changed its size. Interestingly, if we look at the name animate and I double click it, so you can see the shape of the letters partway through the animation. So you don't really want that information in your formulas because it will create some wacky results. So basically, I just use this name layer to generate the text and then actually show it here, which if we look at the expression in there, basically the source text from this layer just comes from that layer. So I've just pick whipped it to there. And that way you only have to update one line of text, but it'll do both at the same time, as you can see there, which changes the width. There are some text tools in Universe, which some quite nice ways of bringing on text, but because you apply the text tools to a solid, it measures the solid. So it doesn't see them as a separate entity where the After Effects text, it sees it as a small bounding box, which is good for width measurements. So the next element we've got, if we zoom in a bit, was this screen text. Now this is just a load of random text that sort of gives it that data look, and it's just really a little detail. It's not intended for anyone to read. It just makes the whole thing feel a bit more digital and data-like. Universe has got some great tools called screen text, which if we choose the preset, go back in here, and you can see there's a load of just different random text things that scroll up and generate text, and it's all completely generated within the software. It's all sort of stuff coming from script. Some of it's pre-programmed, but there's no, it's all made within the system, so it works very quickly. And you can actually see RedG tools, which it's obviously got information from the project I was working on. And you can see if I move it, it just gives you nice scrolling text. So it's a nice element to add. And I've just got it quite soft. You play with the opacity. And then that is controlled. You can see I'm using an alpha. So I've built a mask, which is just basically a box with a soft edge, which controls which bit you can see. And the only thing with that is it has another expression in it. Oh, wrong layer, this one, where the size of the mask, which you can see here, is using the same width measurements. So you can see here we're getting the sequence total. So I've actually nicked the width from this blue box and then added a little bit extra. You can see there C plus 150. So C is the width of this box, and then I've added 150 on it to make it slide over so the mask is there. The only thing that's different is a mask centers, the axis point is the center. So if the box gets bigger, it moves disproportionately. So I've tricked the anchor point to always being at that point. So it doesn't matter how long the box is, it'll always recalculate the anchor point, which is basically looking at the width and just dividing it by 2. set the anchor point on the left edge, so that way when it grows, it always grows out to the right rather than out left and right from the center point. So that mask is used purely to control where we're seeing the screen text, which if I turn back on, so you can see it sort of blends out and just disappears, which is quite nice just as that little extra element. Next, we've got the team logos. Now, in this case, I've only used the 3 team logos. Normally on something like if I'm working on the Premier League, there'll be 20 team logos, and I'll quite often put them all in a separate pre-comp. So you just have one pre-comp for team logos. And that way you can then use that pre-comp of team logos in all the different stats pages you're doing, rather than having to redo everything for each one. But it's quite a simple principle. Basically, there's the 3 logos. You'll only ever see one at a time, and that's based on, in our control, this team drop-down. This is a relatively new thing in After Effects. You can see drop-down menu control. So we can just drag that in. That's nice because on previous events, such as the last World Cup, to select the flag or badge, I would use a text layer, and you'd type in a 3-letter trigram, and that text layer would activate the appropriate flag. But the problem with that is we had an issue with Spain one day where the 3-letter official trigram of Spain is ESP. So whenever you typed in ESP into this text field, it would activate the Spain flag. But the editor who was on that day typed in SPA thinking that was it. So then when the project got rendered, they failed to notice that the flag was invisible because there was no flag with an SPA code. So that was a workaround I'd come up with. With drop-downs, it's much better because you don't have to know how to spell these teams. You can simply just go and pick it from a drop-down box like that. The drop-down itself works very simply. You hit edit, you can keep adding as many options as you want, name them. A question that's come up previously is this name is an arbitrary name that you can give it. It's not used by After Effects in any way. It's just a choice. After Effects only cares about this number. And when it comes to the expressions, we also need to worry about the number. So you can put them alphabetical or choice, whatever. I would normally do alphabetical, not to show bias. And then the way to make it work is on each flag, logo in this case, if we go to EE to see our expression, I've basically put an expression on the opacity. And it's an if-else expression, which is one of my favorites and very easy to learn. As usual, I've got a variable, which I've just called A. As you can see, I've used A down here as well. I tend to just use the alphabet. And basically, I'm saying, look at that. So it's pointing it towards the result of this, which if we press edit, basically the result of this will be a number. So this is either giving a 1, 2, or 3 in this case, and it gives you as many numbers as you want. So then the expression here is saying, if that field equals 1, then make it 100, otherwise make it 0. So obviously that isn't 1, that's number 3 in the list. If we make it 1, you'll see instantly it changes to 100% because the expression is true. So then that's what I do for the first one. The reason I also like the numbers, which is quite useful, is if we expand out the next 2, you'll see the only difference is I just copy and paste. I'll copy that expression, paste it into there, and I just change that to say 2. So that one we're saying if that value is 1, make it 100 or else 0. If it's 2, make it 100 or else 0. And then you guessed it, if it's 3, 100 or else 0. So basically that, when you've got all 3 open, you'll see here as soon as I change to the next one, that goes to 0, that goes to 100. So it's just actively switching to the correct flag for us. So drop-down's a brilliant thing, and especially good in an edit scenario where you want an editor to pick the right team quickly. You could also, the main color, you could set that to, so I've obviously got the picker, so if we went green, we can do that. Now you'll see everything will go green in a second once the beach ball goes away. You could set that to be part of, so you could set the color to automatically change based on the drop-down as well. I prefer not to do that because I think it's just nice to give the editor control of the color a little bit. For example, if you were blue and you're putting it on a background that was predominantly blue, you don't want that to get lost, so you could cheat that blue a little bit and make it darker or lighter. So it gives you a bit more control. It's always nice when it gets stuck having a think. So as I was saying, that my usual process on a large project would be to make a single team choice. one other thing I'll show you while that's everything. These 3 logos you'll see are numbered. I have a technique I use whenever I'm making logos for a job like this. If I can just get my, let's open it. No, I don't want mail, let's do this one. I make a little project called All Logos. This allows me to, if we open that up, this is where the logos actually come from. The first step I do whenever I'm doing a job like this, especially when you're working in sport, every team or federation is responsible for their own logo. So that can get messy because they all have their own beliefs about how logos should be. So you end up getting all different sizes. Normally I would use AI files as well because they work better in After Effects. You can zoom them in and the edges stay sharp. Here we go, that's caught up, now gone green, as you see. Hopefully Photoshop will open at some point, or not. Try again. Yeah, so the first step I do is I get all of the logos and bring them in and sort of unify them. So this is my actual project I've used for the EuroLeague. And you can see here we've got all the logos. The numbers are arbitrary and just so I can keep track of where they are, but you can see I can turn on and off different logos. And the key here is because I know this project, I've made a 1000 by 1000 pixel square, and then I just bring every logo in and make it as big as I can within that 1000 by 1000 pixel square. At least that way you're giving equal prominence to each team. You can see this logo is obviously smaller than that one, takes up all the space. In my opinion, that's just better use. If I was designing a logo for a federation, I'd be making it either square or a large circle because it uses all the available space. A lot of federations also have quite strict rules on what's happening. So for example, Real Madrid give us this logo to use on a dark. This is only for the basketball team, but so you can see that's using the full space. But if it's on a light background, they specify you have to use this logo, which obviously is a lot smaller and a lot more space, so it's not as prominent. But at least this way I've created all the options and they're all the same size. So we'll get out of Photoshop and you'll see in here, so you can see they're numbered. So I just bring that in as an After Effects. If you can see here, team logos, all team logos, and I've got rid of the others because I didn't need them for the project, but they all just sit there. And I know they all fill the same space, so it's quite nice that when you have a holder like this hexagon, it doesn't matter what logo we use, they fill the space perfectly and none of them will hang out. And they're all sort of fairly equally sized. The final step on final elements, so you can see all the elements are sort of building up quite nicely. The final thing we have is a null lens flare. I've gone for the universe variation. Universe comes with a lens flare system, which you can see here. You get quite a decent selection of different lens flare options. They're fractionally, you can adjust the color and the brightness and the scale, but not really much else. So this is good if you want something quick. This is part of Universe. If you've got Red Giant Complete, you also get the full lens flare package in the VFX suite, which allows you to animate every single element of a lens flare and really get into it. But for this project, that's overkill. I just wanted a quick lens flare. So I picked one that was sort of suitable, and you can see here it's just got some streaks and a little bit of a flare here. There's no sort of, or a bit of secondaries out here. And I wasn't really worried about the color because, let's close these up. If you have a look in the effects control, so I've got my lens flare, and then I'm using a tint, which this color is then mapped to the same control surface, so every color will be green. And I'm using tint because I want the white to stay white, so the nice bright highlight stays white, but I've tinted every other part of it. So even if it was originally different colors, it's now the color I want. And the point is I sort of want everything to blend and become part of the same thing, because the key is the logo is there and everything's there really to highlight the name. As I showed you before, the slider control, which is used for animation. If we have a look in here, we only really have the tint color expression, which is just pick whip to the color. Now the animation is a bit trickier. My thought is I wanted the little flare to start at the left corner and move all the way over, but you can see on my light location, it does actually animate all the way over to here, and then this last bit it shoots back again. Now obviously I don't know how long that's going to be because it depends on the text. In fact, if we do the thing again, we'll come to the end and we'll just add a load of letters to make it longer. You'll notice the box gets longer, but the flare's got longer as well. So the flare is actually, it knows how long the box is, so it can track along the top edge of the box. To do that is, it's starting to get a bit trickier, but it's actually still quite simple. I've given the first variable of A, which is basically a fixed distance, which is where I want 428 pixels in, which is basically at that point there. B is my slider, which is used for the animation to actually make the animation happen. C is taking the width measurement again of the text. D is just a mathematical calculation, which is basically taking the width measurement of the text multiplied by the slider, which will be a normal 0 to 1. So it goes from 0 to the full width of the text. And then I'm adding the buffer to that number. So it's basically working out from that point to that point. And then E is just the value that I'm using. Because we're using a light location, I can't split the values. I only actually really care about the X value, not the Y value. So basically that E is the Y value, which then you come down to the position. So you can see D is the result of that maths. And then E is just a set number, which keeps it at that level. Which you can see if I change that, it will move it down. So that was just a case of moving it around, just copying the number from there, basically. So that's it. Once you get your head around things like that, it's quite simple, but it's a nice touch, I think, to have the flare moving along the edge. So that's basically all the elements of building the name super. Let's just get rid of all those E's. So now the next step is to build our essential graphic. So if we go to the essential graphics panel, which for those who aren't familiar with it, it's up in here, essential graphics. Let's close all. This is how it normally comes up. So the first step is you need to find the sequence you're working on, which we're working on namestrap. So if we go to namestrap, I'll just delete these off so we can show you how it's actually built. So the master is actually the sequence name, and then the name, we can call it whatever we want. I'll call it 1800 just so I can tell what it is. We can then, as long as we've got the correct sequence loaded like that, we can hit this solo supported properties, and this will basically expand the sequence, the composition, and show us every possible value that can be dragged up into here, which will allow control from the Premiere project later. So although you can control everything, there's kind of an argument that you need to plan this out carefully, because if you give the editor full control of everything, you might as well have got the editor to make the graphic in the first place. One other thing, the other button here, set poster time, allows you to take a snapshot of the graphic effectively. So if we were there and that was a set poster time, that's not much use because then the editor's not going to know what it should look like. So it's always good to make sure, get a decent frame, and then that's going to go with the motion graphic file. So now, as we discussed before, the point of my control layer is, the majority of my effects are in the control layer. So if we work our way down here, there's the color that we need. Just because I'm fussy, I like to make that the English version because I'm based in the UK, even though the software is the American spelling and any scripts, expressions have to have the American spelling. It's just a habit. Then I've got my team drop down, and then you can label it team choice. There's one step I skipped over. One thing I'll just show you quickly is in this particular situation, you'll see here all of the layers are parented. The control layer becomes the parent of all those. Now the reason I've done that is if we look in here, the X position, which I've got a slider on, which is here. So the X position is a slider, which basically is 0, is controlling the position of the control layer. So I'm using that as a way of moving everything. So by moving that slider, it changes the X position of the control layer, and then everything else is attached to the control layer. So it's just a cheating way of moving things around quickly. If we come back to there, so then we want our X position slider. Then we can change that to X position. Now, another thing when you're within Essential Graphic is there's certain control you can have on different things. Color, there's no options. The team choice, because that's a drop-down box, we can come in here and see that again, which is useful if you've got a spelling mistake or want to change it. I personally don't ever do it in here. I do that in the effects control because I want it to be correct everywhere. The X position, because it's a slider, the edit range gives you the ability to set minimum and maximum values for the slider. This can be useful if you want to restrict the control someone has. So for example, in this case, you can see the X position doesn't go too far over. We might want someone to have a graphic on the right. So I might make that 900, say. And there you can see I've got a lot more scope, if that maybe even go more. But basically you can control what the editor has the ability to do. So that gives the editor some control. So as you can see, all three of those have come from our control. So that becomes quite handy. And that's what I was saying, it's all part of the planning. I start with visualizing the graphic, then work about what elements you want the editor to control, and then build it backwards, putting the relevant controls in here, and it just saves working it out later. So now the only other function we really want to bring, which this is the other thing with my color coding, which is part of my organization, is the yellow are things that are changeable, green you tend to leave alone. We need our source text. Now keeping in mind that the name animate is actually the one we see, but it's source text. You'll see here is it's just taking it from this layer. So what we want to do is edit that layer, and that will edit both. So then we can bring that up, change that to player name. Now the edit properties controls in here, this gets a bit tricky, but you do have the capability of giving the editor control over the font and size. I find with most projects I don't do that because the font's been chosen and probably copyright cleared, or it may be an exclusive font for the project I'm working on. Especially a lot of the sports federations have their own fonts, so I don't really want an editor messing with that, so I'll take that control away, but it's there if it's useful for whatever job you're doing. So now that's the controls the editor's going to have, and you'll see it all works properly in here. In fact, this is an interesting process that anyone who buys templates of people like VideoHive, a lot of people making templates miss this and end up giving you instructions on what layers to go digging in to find things. If I were making templates to sell, I'd be doing it like this, because there's all the controls you want and people can edit what they want. And of course you can put a load more in there. So really it's quite a nice control center, a control place to keep it all together. So anyway, to make our motion graphic, just hit the export button. It'll ask us to save the project, which is fine. We'll save that. It does a little bit of flicking about, and it's basically building a collapsed file with all of the elements and all the instructions in one file. It then asks us where we'd like to save it. In this case, I'm just going to save it to my desktop, which there's the file name. It's just a .MOGRT file, a MOGRT file. We save that. Takes a second, and it's done. So that's the creation of the MOGRT file. Now we'll go to Premiere. So the next step in Premiere is, as we saw, I've used the graphics tab, which I haven't changed, so it gives me the essential graphics on the right. If you don't happen to have that there, you can just come, there we go, beach ball again, up in the windows. Here we go, so window, it comes up on here, essential graphics, so you can call that up. And once it's thought about it, it'll come back on the right here. Not very happy today. So the motion graphics file, so here we go. There's two tabs, there's browse and edit. Browse we use to look at your library. And we can bring one in. You can see I've already got these ones here, but if we bring in, that's the 1500, I'll bring in the 1800 for this session, which is my time. You can see there's the file there. Select the file. Annoyingly, you can't select multiple MOGRTs. You have to bring them in one by one, which is a little bit annoying, but you can see it's instant, and there it is, our green one. Now that's only brought it into the library. It hasn't got anything to do with the project as yet. If I come along here, to bring it into the actual project, you just drag it down. One thing that's interesting, you'll notice I tend to get funny how I name things. So these are all called RG Uni, and the idea of that is if you want to find things quickly, by putting a prefix on names, you can narrow down your list. So here's all my RG Uni ones. Drag that into the timeline, And before I do that, I'll just show you over on the right, these are previous motion graphics that we've got, and you'll see there's 1500, but there's no 1800, so it's not in the project. When I bring this down, it'll import it into the project, and you'll see instantly it's added it into the file there. Now it's a simple case of selecting it, and once it's selected, you can see here's our controls that we set up, and you can see here's the range from -400 to 1300. So we can control it, we can change the name or add things to it, and it works exactly as we'd expect. It'll expand out, changes the size of the box. We can change the badge. We can pick a color, which always does that little flick to black and white. Now, the only thing to think is you can see it's got the red line, it needs to render. You have to keep in mind that this is actually using the After Effects engine. You also need to have the Red Giant Universe tools installed because I've used those to build it. But it won't necessarily play in real time because it is using After Effects, and of course it depends how complex. We're using flares and quite a few different things, so it's a little bit complicated. So you can always render and replace that, or as we were saying before, when I work on a project like this, I'd get it to the point where once you've got your layers stacked up and you're happy with that, I might render that whole chunk from in to out and just put the video on the top layer, because that way when you go to do your export, it'll use that top layer as well, and it's all much faster. One final thing, obviously, although you've only got certain controls here, it's still a standard graphic element, so we can still shrink it down with the normal tools, and you've got position controls here, which is why I never built a Y position in. You can also control the X position that way, but the one thing I didn't like is, which is actually a problem that I'd redesign that if I were going to use it for real, is the flare cuts off. But you can see it's quite a good way, and it gives the editor the control they need, and it's very fast to use. Very fast. If you were doing stuff and had 20 different teams, you can instantly drag one of these on, and you'll notice as well that one doesn't affect the other. So if I bring that same, so that's exactly the same tool, that's the one we've made with the longer name, that one's as the default. So if I change one, it doesn't affect the other. So if we move that one up, you'll see they're completely separate elements. So if you need loads of name supers, it's a really quick way to do it. So that sort of covers everything. I'll invite Simon back and see if we've got any questions that I can answer in the last period. We're also providing, this project is available, I believe, in the chat section. Simon will explain more about that, but I've basically provided this project exactly as you've seen it, just missing the logos, which are copyright logos. So I've made some Red Giant logos for you to play with. But it's all the After Effects projects. You can then create the MOGRTs yourself and have a play with it and see all the expressions I've used and tinker with it as you see fit.
This is fantastic, Jason. I do have a couple of questions, but also a couple of comments. There's a lovely thing that Jesse said. This is hands down the best expression demo I've ever seen. Thanks for hosting. So thanks for that, Jesse. And also Peter saying this is good stuff. I need to rewatch it. So it's just worth re-mentioning that this is lots of Jason's hard-fought experience over a whole range of different tournaments, finding out what you mentioned at the beginning, the ability to work quickly and to get stuff done because you're working in a fast-paced environment. So that trade-off about working a little bit ahead of time so that you can then make it much faster when there are last-minute changes or additions and stats and so on.
Yeah, definitely. I think the key is you need clients who are willing to have a bit of faith that a lot of this is experimental, getting it to work properly. But the idea is like at the start of a normal sports season, if I spend a couple of weeks building this, it means you've got funky looking name supers that you can adjust instantly. You don't need a graphic designer to sit there and make all your name supers for you, and you can have quite stylish things. So it's sort of spending a little bit of money up front, which is going to save you a lot over the course of the season.
Absolutely. And there's some other technical things that are probably worth mentioning. I was just wondering what the best practice for sharing the MOGRTs you found, because you're making an actual MOGRT file for sharing across servers and different machines. But I think originally After Effects defaults to ask you to save it to a library, doesn't it? To your own personal library under the Export Motion Graphics template button.
Well, the trick I do, like when we're working on something like the World Cup or the Euros, I have a trick that as you see, these elements are in once they've been brought in. So these ones that I brought in recently, I can delete those from the timeline, and they now sit in this folder. And then what I would do is I would save this as a template project that everyone would use this as the basis, because then within it, I might rename that as name supers, for example. They can grab it straight from here and drop it on the timeline, and you don't even need to bring them into your system.
That's a great tip, actually. That's really good.
There is one sort of hidden part to it that when you bring it in, it actually creates an essential graphic. So if I don't know if this will show me. Yeah, beach ball. It basically, the MOGRT unwraps itself and it becomes a .ae graphic file. If this works, if it stops flashing. Here we go. It's not going to let me show you where it is. Basically, next to the project is normally where it goes. Let's see if we can find it in here.
It was up there. It was Reveal and Finder, high up the list.
Was it? Oh yeah, look at that.
Yep.
It's normally down lower. So there you go. So that's what it's created.
It's changed its location.
But basically, it sits next to. So here's the project file that we're playing with here. The Premiere project file is that one. And it creates a motion graphic media template. Annoyingly, it puts it in all these random folders, but that's basically the file will be one of these ones that I brought in. You have to find the right one, but normally I pull those all out and just sit them in here because it still works just as well. It keeps it neater. I'll copy that folder to any local computer or to a network that can be seen, and then that way you can use it straight from in here. So it's a bit fiddly, but it's something.
That's nice.
Yeah, and that's a way of sort of sharing
There's another workaround. Sorry, Jason, there's another workaround as well. That AE graphic, if you rename that as zip and then unzip that file, then you actually get the original After Effects file. So if you do lose the original master, there is a way of diving into those and extracting the actual master After Effects project from it.
Yeah, it's got easier now. You can actually just right click and open it. You don't even need to do what you're talking about. You don't need to rename it zip. It knows it's an After Effects file. So that is an interesting way of, once you've built a graphic, if you do need to change something, you can go in. But then when you do go in, be aware that the AE graphic file is the After Effects file. So you can open it, but then it doesn't update this. You have to go through the process of bringing it back in again. The other thing to keep in mind is this library doesn't have any relevance to what's in the project. I can go and delete these from the library. And this is just a library. It won't affect the project in any way. You can see it's still there in the project.
Do the MOGRT still have that limit of 2 GB limit if you wanted to embed videos inside them? Because that was the original one when they introduced it.
Oh, that's something I don't know. The one thing I try and make them all as slim as possible, just because obviously if you've got 2 GB of video in there when you're using a Premiere timeline, you know it's got to look at that 2 GB. So personally, that would be something I'd be avoiding.
I know a couple of sports broadcasters who do exactly that, who make sure that it's the exact same video for the background, the same colors and so on. But you're right, there's a trade-off with that.
Yeah.
And one of the comments we had on the earlier session was the speed of processing. And I just thought I'd mention the fact that if you are using multiple effects, say, for example, from Universe, all of those are GPU accelerated. And so this might sound an obvious thing to say. We were having a conversation the other day about the faster your GPU, the faster these things will process. And I've been doing some tests. I've got a late 2019 MacBook Pro with a Radeon card in it, and I've got earlier this year a March version of the Dell 7540 with an NVIDIA 4000 in it. And I have to say the Dell machine is twice as fast of playing back on the timeline than the Mac one. So it does depend. If you've got a better graphics card, then it can just exponentially increase the systems or the performance of these things. But I think that thing you were mentioning earlier about using render and replace or rendering out an entire section once it's been signed off is probably a good way of using it when you're in Premiere.
I think especially in sports broadcasting, that when you're doing stuff in a hurry, I like to always render stuff so you know if something's right and you're happy with it, render it so you don't have to mess with it again, because when you're in a tight turnaround situation, the last thing you want is to discover a 10-minute render.
Yes, exactly. And also, if you update a MOGRT and slightly tweak it and then bring it back and drop it over onto a file on the timeline, it does now ask you, doesn't it, to if you want to replace that instance or all instances on the timeline.
Not for me.
Or maybe it's because it's the same one. I think if you drop it over onto an existing one when you're dragging it in.
No, that was the green one. So that's now 1500. It was the 1800. I think that's important that people know that, though, that the one thing to be very careful of with MOGRTs is, even though you've got something in your library, if you go and remake the MOGRT, it doesn't update. You can't go and edit a MOGRT and assume. You've got to delete it from here, re-import it using the process we used, and then replace it in the timeline. Every instance is sort of a totally separate version of it, and that can trick some people. And like the process you were talking about, where you get the AE graphic file, and you go in and actually open and edit the AE graphic file in After Effects, that's then just an After Effects project. You've then got to recreate your MOGRT and bring it back in. So quite often when I'm doing these, there's quite a bit of testing it, because obviously I'll build a file, bring it into Premiere, test all the functionality, find mistakes in it, so then I've got to go back to the After Effects, rebuild everything again, which that's a little bit annoying. But again, the idea is to get everything working at the beginning to save time over a longer period.
Yep, absolutely. That's the last minute is where the crunch time is where you need the efficiency too, right? Oh, well, we're just about up with time, but a last question from James, which is more of an audio graphics templates question. He's asking, have you found a workaround for swapping audio to generate audio reactive graphics templates? For example, generating a live waveform for a voice. My take on this, James, would be, sorry, Jason, I was just going to add in my bit. There's two ways where you can generate inside the Trapco tools, for sure. You can generate an audio waveform for a voice, one using form, and also using sound keys. And if you're using that, it's just simple as just pointing to a different audio file in the comp. But I just wondered what your experience was that, Jason.
Well, I think the one problem, if I understand the question correctly, is referring to within a MOGRT file, which the problem is there's no real sort of two-way directional thing. So for example, if I had a picture, I can't send a picture from here into After Effects interactively. Obviously, I can have some pictures and send to After Effects, but similar to the drop zone that existed in Final Cut Pro, where you can drop a picture into a slab and then that sends it dynamically. Because if you wanted a music track in your timeline, like you cut up the sync and you wanted the graphics to react to the sync on the timeline, there's no way to do that because you can't send a live shot, if that makes sense. So you'd have to physically bring your audio into After Effects and then you could process it and then bring it back into Premiere. But there's no two-way dynamic sharing at the moment, like a drop zone type functionality.
Yeah, that's true. Oh, I see what you mean. Okay, thanks for the clarification. James says, can you do it from the Premiere side? Yes, so what you were saying, Jason.
Yeah.
So yes, that
no,
I remember
can't
back in the day, yeah, good old Motion had those lovely drop zones, which haven't quite made their way into modern timelines.
No. Hopefully they will.
Cool, and also TJ has made a good point about is there no way to update a MOGRT that's used multiple times in a timeline? So this maybe the thing I'm thinking of is the fact that you can generate these MOGRTs inside Premiere and use them on Premiere. I've seen it work that way, but
yes,
it's worth doing some digging. I think we'll look at see if it's possible with a MOGRT generated from After Effects and see what the workflow is there.
I don't know of one, which is a bit annoying, but yeah, it would be a useful thing. I guess the thing is, if it depends on what the update was. If you had like a text update, just allow a bit more control within the MOGRT, but I don't think it still wouldn't ripple through and do all of them because they're all separate entities on the timeline.
Yeah, yeah. A feature request, potentially, yes. Lovely, excellent. Thanks so much, Jason. Thanks everyone for letting us drift slightly over time. We appreciate the time that you've carved out for having these sessions today. Can I grab your screen just quickly, Jason?
Of course.
Here we go. And some lovely comments coming over, Jason, about how useful this has been. So thank you again.
No problem.
And the quick last one from, where was there? Is there a great way to find out about expressions from Peter? I did have a link. I haven't got it right at the moment. I have to dig that one out and I'll share it tomorrow's session, though. I did find a fantastic explanation of expressions as well, if you wanted to take this knowledge and go on further. But I'll see if I can dig that out and find it. But just to remind you that if you later on today or a few hours time, if you come back to the Maxon Volume Program Training channel on YouTube, then you'll see Jason's recording here. And also, if you want to book into the sessions for tomorrow and Thursday, please feel free to click on the register buttons inside this PDF. You'll get the link to the PDF in the follow-up email, and I've also put it in the chat window.
Tomorrow has loads of crazy expressions.
Session. So where's the best place to find out expressions? Tomorrow on this session. Excellent. And also that link to the project file that you kindly shared with us is also in the chat window right now, and I put it as an answer to a couple of the questions. You'll get it in the link to the or in the email, the automated email that follows up in an hour's time. But if you haven't got any of those, please let me know, training@maxon.net, and then I can then send that to you personally. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Jason. This has been really great again, and looking forward to tomorrow's session too. And thanks everyone for attending.
Hopefully see you all tomorrow.
Well, stay well, everyone. Absolutely, yes, for the next one. Got a couple of quick comments here saying we need to rewatch this one a couple of times as well. So yes, that's your homework. Right. Thanks, everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye.
Bye-bye.